I'm Kourtney Smith.
And I'm Elyse Sharp.
And we are two nerds who are here to make Shakespeare easier to understand.
In this podcast, we will explore as many dimensions to Shakespeare's plays as we can by looking at the text, examining the historical context in which the plays were written, and how his plays are viewed through modern lenses of feminism, racism, classism, colonialism, nationalism, ableism, all of the isms.
We will discuss how his plays shaped both the past and present, and, as theater makers, how his plays can be responsibly performed today, all while trying our best to approach his works without giving in to Bardolatry.
So, Shakespeare anyone?
Hi, listeners. Want to support Shakespeare Anyone? Visit shakespeareanyone.com/support or check out the links in our episode description. Now, onto the episode.
Hi, Kourtney.
Hi, Elyse.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm so excited to start a new play today, and we are starting As You Like It.
Yeah, we considered doing As You Like It a few years ago, actually in our first year when we were like, what should we do after Macbeth? And we were really down to Twelfth Night or As You Like It and went with Twelfth Night.
I think it also came up for discussion when we chose A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Mm-hmm.
It's been one that we've sort of like, it comes up every time we're like, we feel like it's time for a comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And here we are. It's like, oh yeah, finally it's time.
Yeah. And well deserved too, because As You Like It is less produced, I think, than Midsummer. Well, definitely less produced than Midsummer and Twelfth Night, but is rich in like the story and possibility in interpretation. And so I'm just excited to be going to the forest of Arden.
Yeah. And as we talked about, I think it is well time for this one, but it's also the right time for this one because it's going to build off of the work that we have done for Twelfth Night and A Midsummer Night's Dream in a really lovely way a few years later.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Kourtney, we've talked about how this has been sort of like in our discussions when we've been picking episodes for a while, but what has your previous experience been with As You Like It?
I have not touched this play. Oh, no, that's not true. I read this play during my master's, but prior to that, it was in a small book that I had from like inherited from a relative of like 4 Shakespeare comedies, including A Midsummer Night's Dream. So my first exposure to it, I think, was in high school reading, but there were no footnotes. And I had seen it a couple of times, and then I did see a college production that made choices. I'm just going to leave it there. I saw a college production. So it's kind of just been a little bit distanced from scholarly research and academic exploration. And so I'm excited to like really dive into more scholarship around this play because even though it seems like a very basic play, there's got to be so much richness to what's happening within the play that you can pull from. With our experience learning about the courts in Shakespeare's time and how much he writes about them, those like references too, I'm really excited. But yeah, it's been mostly like a couple reads here and there, a couple of views, but nothing as intensive as like my previous experience with like Hamlet or anything like that.
Right.
What about you, Elyse?
I am similar. My first memory of this play is also seeing a college production, and then I performed this play. So I have done a production of this, and I played Oliver Du Bois and Oliver Martext, among others. Although in our production, Oliver was Olivier, because I was me. We made the character a woman. And then I have seen a couple of professional productions of this since. But like you, it is certainly not one that like I come to with a lot of previous deep or plentiful experiences. It is a play that I always enjoy, but like you with Hamlet, it's not one that I'm coming into like I do with Macbeth with a lot of advanced knowledge. And I think it's been like 10 years since that production. So it's been a while since I've done sort of any in-depth look at this play. So I'm excited to dive into it. So As always, our synopsis episodes are just pure synopsis, a summary of what happens in the play as written. We do our best to remove any unintentional interpretation on this text. However, with this one, sometimes Touchstone does go on, so we will summarize what he says. But this is the basics of what do these characters say and what do they do in the play. And then our next episode will be our Stuff to Chew On episode, where we'll go over some high-level themes and facts about the play, basic analysis, and then, as always, later on in our series, we will dive down those rabbit holes that we love to get into and do some deeper analysis on this play.
Yeah, as tempting as it is to read the text and want to dive into the beautiful language and the historical references, those things will come later. But as Elyse says, it's what each character is saying and what is happening, act by act and scene by scene, so that everyone has the same scaffolding as we go into some of these deep dives.
Exactly. But for now, let's dive into the synopsis, shall we?
Sounds great. Here is our synopsis of As You Like It. The play begins in the French countryside in an orchard outside the country house of a noble family. Orlando Du Bois, the youngest son of the noble family, enters mid-conversation with his elderly servant, Adam. Orlando recalls how his late father, Sir Roland Du Bois, bequeathed him a small inheritance of 1,000 crowns and instructed Orlando's eldest brother, Oliver, to make sure Orlando was brought up well. Orlando complains that while Oliver pays for the middle brother, Jaques, to go to school, and by all reports, Jaques is doing well at school, Oliver neglects his duties to Orlando by making Orlando stay at home in the countryside. Orlando continues, complaining that Oliver treats his horses better than Orlando is treated, and furthermore, Oliver's neglect deprives Orlando of the good qualities he naturally has. Orlando describes how Oliver makes Orlando eat with the servants, robs Orlando of his rightful inheritance, and undermines Orlando's ability to participate in society by not educating Orlando properly. Basically, he's being treated like Cinderella in his father's house. Orlando explains that this is the source of his grief, and he is growing frustrated with this treatment. Orlando says that he will not endure this treatment any longer, but also does not know yet how to avoid it.
Oliver enters, and Orlando tells Adam to stand aside a little and listen to how Oliver harasses Orlando. Oliver asks Orlando what he is doing, or making, and Orlando replies that he is making nothing, as he has not been taught how to make anything. Oliver asks what Orlando is marring then. Note, making and marring was a common word pairing in Elizabethan England, so the brothers are starting to engage in a little wordplay. Orlando replies that he is doing exactly what Oliver wants, spoiling himself with idleness. Oliver tells Orlando to find something to do, then insults Orlando. Orlando ignores the insult and asks if he should tend to Oliver's pigs and eat with them, a la the prodigal son. He asks further, what extravagance has he lived that he is now so impoverished?
Oliver asks if Orlando knows where he is. Orlando responds, yes, he is in Oliver's orchard. Oliver asks if Orlando knows who he is standing in front of. Orlando replies that, yes, he knows who Oliver is better than Oliver knows Orlando. Orlando continues that he knows that Oliver is his eldest brother, and Oliver should treat Orlando better. Orlando acknowledges that it is customary courtesy that the eldest brother is treated better than the younger siblings, but Oliver should still treat Orlando like a brother, even if there were 20 brothers between them. Orlando says that he has as much of their father in him as Oliver does, even though Oliver being firstborn means he is nearer to their father's reverence, meaning position and status.
Reverence can also be an insulting jest, as it was a euphemism for excrement, and Oliver takes it that way. They fight throughout this, and ultimately, Oliver is restrained by Orlando. Oliver asks if Orlando will hit him, calling Orlando a villain. Orlando replies that he is no villain. He again asserts that he is the youngest son of Sir Roland du Bois, and says that calling any of Sir Roland's sons a villain is an insult to Sir Roland. Orlando says that if Oliver wasn't his brother, Orlando would strangle him. For calling Orlando a villain, Oliver has insulted himself.
Adam comes forward and interjects. asking the young men to make peace in memory of their father. Oliver tells Orlando to let him go. Orlando says that he will not until he wants to. Orlando tells Oliver to hear him. Orlando repeats a vision of what Orlando said to Adam a few moments ago, that their father instructed Oliver to take care of Orlando and give Orlando a good education. But Oliver has treated Orlando like a peasant and not taught him how to be a proper gentleman. Orlando says, again, that he feels the spirit of their father in him and that he will no longer endure this treatment. Orlando gives Oliver an ultimatum. Oliver can either let Orlando train to become a gentleman or give Orlando his inheritance, and Orlando will leave the house and seek his fortune elsewhere.
Oliver asks what Orlando will do when the inheritance runs out. Will he beg? Oliver tells Orlando to go inside. Oliver doesn't want to be troubled much longer by Orlando and will give Orlando part of Orlando's inheritance. Oliver asks Orlando to leave. Orlando says that he will not further offend Oliver. Oliver insultingly also tells Adam to follow Orlando. Adam comments on how different Oliver is than Sir Roland was, and acknowledges how long he, Adam, has served this family. Adam and Orlando exit.
Alone on stage, Oliver remarks on how Orlando is beginning to get out of his control. Oliver says he will teach Orlando a lesson and not give Orlando any part of the inheritance. Oliver calls a servant, Dennis, who enters. Oliver asks if Charles, the Duke's wrestler, has arrived to speak with him. Dennis says yes. Charles is at the door and is asking to meet with Oliver. Oliver tells Dennis to call Charles in, and Dennis exits. Oliver comments to the audience that this will be a good way to teach Orlando a lesson and that the wrestling match is tomorrow.
Charles enters, and Oliver asks about the news at the new court, implying that there has been some recent change in leadership. Charles says there is no new news, but the old news is that the old Duke was banished by his younger brother, who is now the new Duke, and 3 or 4 loyal lords went into voluntary exile to follow the old Duke. Their lands and revenues now belong to the new Duke, so the new Duke let them go. Oliver asks if Rosalind, the old Duke's daughter, is banished along with her father. Charles replies that no, she is not, because the new Duke's daughter, who is Rosalind's cousin, is so close to Rosalind that the cousin would have followed Rosalind into banishment or died to stay behind. Rosalind and her cousin are both safe at court, and the new Duke loves Rosalind, his niece, like she is his own daughter, and no 2 ladies love each other as much as these 2 cousins do. Oliver asks where the old Duke will live, and Charles replies that reports say that the old Duke is already in the forest of Arden with many merry men, and they are living there like Robin Hood of England. Additionally, rumor has it that many young men join the old Duke every day, and they all spend their time carelessly, like an Eden or a utopia.
Oliver asks if Charles is going to wrestle tomorrow in front of the new Duke. Charles replies that yes, he will, and he has come to let Oliver know something. Charles reveals that he has been told in secret that Orlando has a plan to come to the match tomorrow in a disguise and try to wrestle in a match against Charles. Charles shares that his reputation is on the line tomorrow, and anyone who wrestles him and leaves without a broken limb will be lucky. Charles says that Orlando is young and vulnerable, and in consideration of Oliver's favor towards Charles, Charles would rather avoid beating up Orlando, which Charles must if Orlando makes an attempt because, again, Charles's reputation is on the line. Therefore, Charles says he came to Oliver's house to share this with Oliver in the hope that Oliver might either prevent Orlando from wrestling tomorrow or be prepared to endure the disgrace that Orlando will receive without holding it against Charles.
Oliver thanks Charles for his love, saying that he requites it. Oliver shares that he knew about Orlando's plan to wrestle tomorrow and has tried to convince Orlando not to do it. However, Oliver says, Orlando is resolved to wrestle. Oliver tells Charles that Orlando is the stubbornest young fellow of France, is ambitious, envious, and villainously conspires against Oliver. Oliver tells Charles to use his own discretion, but Oliver would be equally okay with Charles breaking Orlando's neck or Orlando's finger. Oliver warns Charles that it is in Charles's best interest to break Orlando's neck, because if Charles even slightly disgraces Orlando, Orlando will seek revenge. Oliver, almost in tears, swears to Charles that Orlando is the most villainous person alive. Oliver says that he is only speaking like a brother should. But if he were to truly get into the details of Orlando's villainy with Charles, Oliver would blush and weep, and Charles would be shocked. Charles says that he is glad that he came to see Oliver. Charles promises that if Orlando shows up to wrestle, Charles will give him his due, and if Orlando is able to walk without crutches after tomorrow, Charles will retire from wrestling. Charles bids Oliver farewell and exits.
Alone on stage, Oliver addresses the audience and says that now he will go further stir up Orlando. He reveals that he hopes to see Orlando die tomorrow, and he doesn't know why, but he hates Orlando more than anything else. Oliver acknowledges that Orlando is gentle, kind, chivalrous, smart, even though he hasn't had formal education, and so beloved by Oliver's servants that it makes Oliver feel undervalued. But Oliver believes that Charles will fix all of this tomorrow. All Oliver has to do is incite Orlando to go wrestle tomorrow, which Oliver is about to do. Oliver exits.
Next, outside the Duke's palace, Rosalind and her cousin Celia enter mid-conversation. Celia implores Rosalind to be merry, and Rosalind replies that she is already showing more happiness than she feels. Celia says she still wishes Rosalind were merrier. Rosalind says that unless Celia can teach her how to forget that her own father is banished, Celia shouldn't try to make Rosalind feel happier. Celia says this is proof that Rosalind does not love her as much as Celia loves Rosalind, because if the roles were reversed and Rosalind's father had banished Celia's, Celia would accept Rosalind's father as her new dad because she got to stay in Rosalind's presence. Celia argues that if Rosalind truly loved Celia, she would think of Celia's father as her own. Rosalind replies that she will forget her misfortune to celebrate Celia's fortune. Celia then reminds Rosalind that Celia is her father's only heir, and therefore, Rosalind will still inherit everything that was meant to be hers. Celia swears that when her father dies, she will give Rosalind back everything that Celia's father took from Rosalind's father when Rosalind's father was banished. Celia again implores Rosalind to be merry.
Rosalind agrees to be more merry from now on and thinks of games for them to play. She then asks Celia what Celia thinks about falling in love. Celia answers that love can be a game as long as you don't go so far that you ruin your reputation. Rosalind asks what game Celia thinks they should play. Celia says that they should sit and mock fortune until fortune's favor is bestowed equally. Rosalind wishes they could do that, as fortune's favor is often misplaced, and women especially seem to be unfortunate. Celia agrees that fortune rarely makes fair women chaste, and those who are chaste are often ugly. Rosalind argues that Celia is confusing fortune for nature, as fortune deals with the material gifts of the world, while nature controls what features and virtues individuals are endowed with.
Then, Touchstone, the Duke's fool, enters, as Celia argues that while nature may make a woman pretty, it is fortune who rules everything after creation. She also points out that while they may be mocking fortune, fortune has sent Touchstone to interrupt their train of thought. Rosalind and Celia banter a little more over whether fortune or nature has brought Touchstone to interrupt them, before Celia asks Touchstone why he has come to meet them. Touchstone replies that she must go in to see her father. Celia asks if Touchstone has a new job as the messenger, implying perhaps that the fool is not a reliable emissary. Now, fair warning. Throughout the play, Touchstone responds to characters using wordplay, puns, and stock jokes. Because, he's a fool. Sometimes we'll explain jokes. Sometimes we won't. So, here we go.
Touchstone replies that he has not been made a messenger, but swears on his honor that he was instructed to come get Celia and Rosalind. Rosalind asks where Touchstone learned to swear on his honor, and thus begins a series of jokes between the trio about the fool's honor and knavery. LeBeau, a foolish courtier, enters and tells Celia and Rosalind that they are missing some entertainment. Celia, Rosalind, and Touchstone repeatedly trade quips about LeBeau's delivery of this news, which manages to confuse LeBeau and delay his delivery of the news. Eventually, LeBeau reveals that the wrestling match is moving to where they currently are, and Charles the wrestler has already broken the ribs of 3 young men who have challenged him.
Touchstone comments that this is the first time he has heard that breaking ribs is appropriate entertainment for ladies like Celia and Rosalind, and Celia agrees. Rosalind, however, is intrigued. LeBeau repeats that the ladies in Touchstone can stay where they are if they want to see the wrestling, as the match is moving to this location. There's a flourish of trumpets, and as Celia agrees to stay and watch the match, Duke Frederick, Orlando, Charles the wrestler, and other lords in attendance enter. As he enters, Duke Frederick declares that since the young man will not be convinced to not wrestle, the young man can wrestle at his own peril. From a distance, Rosalind points out Orlando and asks LeBeau if that is the young man the Duke is referring to. LeBeau confirms. Celia remarks that Orlando is too young, but looks like he could win.
Duke Frederick then notices Celia and Rosalind, greets them, and asks if they have come to see the wrestling. Rosalind responds that they have, if the Duke gives them permission to stay. The Duke replies that they will not find it entertaining, as Charles is winning every match. The Duke explains that he has tried to dissuade Orlando from challenging Charles out of pity for the young man's youth, but Orlando will not be moved. The Duke asks his daughter and niece to try to convince Orlando not to wrestle. Celia instructs LeBeau to call Orlando over to them, and Duke Frederick moves away.
Orlando comes over to Rosalind and Celia. Rosalind asks if Orlando has challenged Charles, and Orlando replies that no, Charles is the general challenger, and Orlando has come, as others have, to try his strength against Charles. Celia and Rosalind tried to convince Orlando not to risk his life and health by wrestling Charles. Orlando tells them he cannot grant their wishes and asks them to send him positive thoughts as he goes to wrestle, as he has nothing to risk but his life, which is not worth much. The ladies wish him well. Charles then calls Orlando forth to begin the match. Duke Frederick instructs that they will wrestle for one fall, or until one contestant is thrown and has their back or one shoulder and the opposite heel touching the ground. Charles jokes that Duke Frederick will not want to see Orlando go for a second round after trying so hard to dissuade Orlando from wrestling in the first place. Orlando says that they should mock him after the round of wrestling, not before. Orlando and Charles wrestle as Rosalind and Celia cheer for Orlando from the sidelines.
There is a shout, and Orlando is victorious. Duke Frederick calls off the match, and Orlando replies that he is barely warmed up. Duke Frederick asks how Charles is doing, but LeBeau says that Charles cannot speak, presumably due to his injuries. Duke Frederick instructs his train to carry Charles away, and they exit, along with Touchstone. The Duke asks Orlando his name, and Orlando reveals that he is Orlando, the youngest son of Sir Rowland de Boys. Duke Frederick replies with hostility that he wishes Orlando was the son of someone else, as Sir Rowland was Duke Frederick's enemy. Duke Frederick, LeBeau, and the remaining lords exit.
Having observed this interaction from afar, Celia wonders aloud to Rosalind if she, Celia, would be this rude if she was her father. Orlando says that he is more proud to be the youngest son of Sir Rowland de Boys and would not change that to be an adopted heir to Duke Frederick. Rosalind comments to Celia that her father, Duke Sr., loved Sir Rowland, and so did the rest of the world. Rosalind says that if she had known that Orlando was Sir Rowland's son, she would have reinforced her earlier pleas to Orlando with tears.
Celia decides that they should go encourage Orlando, as she is upset by how her father treated him. The women go over to Orlando, and Celia greets him, saying that if he keeps his promises in love as well as he does in acts of valor, his mistress will be happy. Rosalind gives Orlando a chain from her neck, saying that it is all she can give him given her current fortunes. She has no money and no power to give Orlando her hand in marriage, which would be a victor's typical reward in a trial of chivalry.
The women start to go, and Orlando comments that he has been made speechless and was unable to even say thank you. Rosalind claims that Orlando has called them back and returns to try to flirt with Orlando. Celia interrupts, asking Rosalind to go with her. Rosalind follows her cousin, and the women exit, leaving Orlando alone on stage. He again comments on his strange inability to speak around Rosalind, even when she clearly wants to have a conversation. He laments that he has been overthrown by love for Rosalind, as LeBeau appears.
LeBeau tells Orlando to leave Duke Frederick's palace, even though Orlando deserves to stay, because the Duke is now misconstruing everything that Orlando has done. LeBeau comments that the Duke is volatile, but he cannot say more out of fear of being accused of treachery. Orlando thanks LeBeau and asks which of the two women who were at the wrestling tournament is the daughter of the Duke. LeBeau replies that the taller one is the Duke's daughter, and the other is the daughter of the banished Duke. Note, this is the opposite of how the heights of Celia and Rosalind will be described later in the play. LeBeau explains to Orlando that Rosalind has been kept here by Duke Frederick to keep Celia company. However, lately, Duke Frederick is starting to dislike Rosalind, only because people praise her virtues and pity her for her father's fate. LeBeau continues that the Duke's malice towards his niece will soon become suddenly apparent. LeBeau bids farewell to Orlando, wishing they can meet again under better circumstances. Orlando bids LeBeau farewell as LeBeau exits, then comments on his own state. He's facing either a Duke who doesn't like him at court or a brother who doesn't like him at home. He sighs, thinking of Rosalind, and exits.
Elsewhere in the Duke's palace, Celia and Rosalind enter. Rosalind is upset, and Celia tries to get Rosalind to tell her what's wrong. Celia asks if Rosalind is sad for her father, and Rosalind replies that it is part sadness for her father and part sadness over Orlando. Celia tries to convince Rosalind to treat these problems as small nuisances. Rosalind says she cannot, and they go a couple of rounds with Celia trying to cheer Rosalind up with wordplay. Eventually, Celia stops joking and asks in earnest if it is possible that Rosalind should fall in love so quickly with Orlando. Rosalind says that her father loved Orlando's father dearly, and Celia retorts that if a father's feelings dictated theirs, then Celia should hate Orlando, but she doesn't. Rosalind asks Celia to not hate Orlando, for Rosalind's sake. And Celia asks why should she not love Orlando? Is he not deserving?
Duke Frederick enters with a group of lords, as Rosalind says to Celia that Rosalind will love Orlando because he deserves it, and Celia can love Orlando because Rosalind does. Then Rosalind sees the Duke. Celia notes that Duke Frederick's eyes are full of anger. Duke Frederick addresses Rosalind, telling her that she must leave the court as quickly as possible for her own safety. Rosalind questions if her uncle really means to speak to her. He confirms and clarifies that if, after 10 days, she is found anywhere within 20 miles of the court, she will die for it. Rosalind pleads with the Duke to know what offense she has committed. As to her knowledge, she has never even had a negative thought about the Duke. The Duke replies that if words alone could prove innocence, every traitor would be found innocent. The Duke explains that he just does not trust Rosalind.
Rosalind replies that her uncle's lack of trust in her doesn't make her a traitor. She asks him on what grounds he has cause to distrust her. Duke Frederick replies that it is just because she is Duke Senior's daughter. Rosalind replies that she was her father's daughter when her uncle usurped the dukedom and banished Duke Senior. She argues that treason is not inherited, but even if it was, that wouldn't matter in her case as her father wasn't a traitor. Rosalind asks her uncle not to think her a traitor just because she is now poor.
Celia then pipes up, addressing her father very formally, and asks to be allowed to speak. Duke Frederick says that he allowed Rosalind to stay for Celia's sake. Otherwise, Rosalind would have been banished along with her father. Celia replies that she did not ask her father to allow Rosalind to stay. It was his own choice made out of pity for Celia and Rosalind. Celia says that she was too young at that time to fully value Rosalind's companionship, but now Celia knows Rosalind very well. Furthermore, if Rosalind is a traitor, Celia must be one too, because they are so close.
Duke Frederick replies that Rosalind is too subtle a traitor for Celia to have caught on, and Rosalind has put on an act to fool the people who pity her. According to Duke Frederick, Celia has also been fooled by Rosalind, and Celia will benefit from Rosalind's banishment by not being compared to Rosalind in the public eye. Duke Frederick tells Celia not to speak anymore as his decision is final. Rosalind is banished. Celia tells her father to banish her too, as she cannot live without Rosalind. Duke Frederick calls his daughter a fool, then turns to Rosalind and tells her to prepare to leave within 10 days, or, after that, he swears she will die. Duke Frederick exits.
Celia turns to Rosalind and asks where Rosalind will go. If Rosalind wants to change fathers, for Celia will give Rosalind hers, and tells Rosalind to not be more grieved than Celia. Rosalind replies that she has more cause for grief. Celia replies that Rosalind does not and tells Rosalind to be cheerful. Celia asks if Rosalind realizes that the Duke has banished Celia. Rosalind replies that he did not actually banish Celia. Celia says that Rosalind must have forgotten that they are one and the same and cannot be parted. Rather, Duke Frederick must seek another heir. Celia invites Rosalind to join her in thinking about where they will go and what to bring with them. Celia tells Rosalind to try to not take full responsibility for their changes of fortune, then tells Rosalind to say what she wants to do. Celia will go with her.
Rosalind asks where they should go, and Celia replies that they will go seek Duke Senior, Celia's uncle and Rosalind's father, in the forest of Arden. Rosalind replies that this would be dangerous as they are both maidens and thieves will try to rob them because of their beauty. Celia says that she will dress in shabby clothes and dirty her face to make herself less attractive to assailants, and Rosalind should do the same. Rosalind replies that it might be better if she dressed as a man. Celia asks what she should call Rosalind when Rosalind is disguised as a man, and Rosalind replies that she will take on the name of Ganymede. Rosalind asks what Celia should be called, and Celia replies that she will go by the name Aliena. And I want to point out that, moving forward, we will refer to Rosalind as Rosalind and use she/her pronouns when she is presenting as feminine, or when all characters on stage know she is a woman, and use Ganymede and he/him pronouns when the character presents as male. We will also refer to Celia as Celia when all the characters on stage know her identity, and Aliena when she pretends to be Aliena.
Rosalind then asks Celia if they should also try to get Touchstone to come along with them, as he would make their journey more enjoyable. Celia replies that Touchstone would travel the world with her, then says that they should go, pack their jewels and wealth, and decide the best time and way to leave that will help them hide from the pursuit that will follow once the Duke realizes that Celia has left. Celia then declares that they will contentedly leave the palace to seek their liberty, rather than in banishment. Celia then declares that they will contentedly leave the palace to seek their liberty, rather than in banishment. Celia and Rosalind exit.
We move to the forest of Arden, and Duke Senior, Amiens, and a few lords dressed as foresters enter. Duke Senior asks his comrades in exile if pastoral traditions have made life better than those of the court. Are the woods freer from danger than the court? Duke Senior affirms the weather isn't a flatterer, they're counselors. Duke Senior tells them that this is their life free from the crowds and one with nature. Everything is good. Amiens agrees that he would not change anything, and that it's fortunate the Duke can transform his misfortune into a quiet and pleasant attitude.
Duke Senior changes the subject and suggests Amiens and the lords go and kill themselves some deer. Duke Senior then says that it does irk him that the deer, indigenous to the forest, should be killed by invading humans. One of the lords mentions that the melancholy Jaques also grieves the wounding of deer, and thinks that the practice of hunting makes Duke Senior a bigger usurper than his brother, Duke Frederick. The lord continues that he and Amiens saw Jaques lying under an oak tree by a brook where, nearby, a stag, wounded by a hunter, started moaning and weeping. This scene aroused compassion in Jaques for the weeping deer. Duke Senior asks what Jaques said, or if Jaques drew a moral from the scene. The lord replies yes, Jaques moralized it into 1,000 similes. The deer wept into a stream that needed no water, and Jaques said that the deer's death gave too much for humans who already have too much. After the deer left, Jaques said that misery is why he doesn't have a lot of company. Then a herd of deer who newly grazed the pasture jumped alongside Jaques. Jaques told the herd to keep moving because they look ready to be killed. Jaques then insulted the country, city, and court by calling them usurpers and tyrants who scare and kill the animals in their native home. Duke Senior asks if Amiens and the lord left Jaques in this state. The second lord said yes, he was weeping and talking about the sobbing deer. Duke Senior requests to be taken to see Jaques, because he loves to meet with Jaques when he's in these sad fits, because Jaques will be full of things to say. The first lord agrees, I'll exit.
Back at the court, Duke Frederick and lords enter. Duke Frederick asks if it is possible no one saw Celia and Rosalind's escape. Duke Frederick thinks it cannot be, and assumes some servants of his court have agreed to and allowed this to happen. A first lord says that he hasn't heard of anyone that saw Celia. In fact, Celia's attendants said they last saw Celia in bed, And then, in the morning, Celia was not in her bed. A second lord says that the clown Touchstone is also missing. The lord continues that Hesperia, Celia's gentlewoman, confessed that she overheard Celia and Rosalind praise Orlando after he overthrew Charles in the wrestling match, and she believes that wherever they are gone, Orlando is in their company. Duke Frederick commands they fetch Orlando's brother Oliver because, if Orlando is missing, the Duke will make Oliver find Orlando. They should do this without delay in order to bring back Celia and Rosalind. All exit.
Orlando and Adam enter the orchard separately. Orlando calls out and asks who is there. Adam responds by asking Orlando a series of antipophoras, or questions that the speaker then answers themselves. In short, Adam flatters Orlando's virtue, popularity, gentleness, strength, and valiance, then questions his foolishness to wrestle the Duke's wrestler Charles. Adam laments that some people's good qualities betray them. Such is true for Orlando. Orlando asks Adam what is the matter. Adam tells Orlando to not come inside the house because Orlando's brother, Oliver, heard about Orlando's victory and plans to burn the house with Orlando in it. Or, if that doesn't work, Oliver has other plans to try to kill Orlando. Orlando asks Adam where he should go and if he'd need to beg and thieve to survive. If that's the case, Orlando says he would rather submit himself to the malice of his brother.
Adam says that Orlando does not have to do that because he, Adam, has 500 gold coins that he saved while working for Orlando's father as a pension. Instead, Adam tells Orlando to take the money and let Adam be his servant. Despite his old age, Adam says he is strong and robust because, when he was young, he remained sober and celibate. Orlando admires the faithfulness of servants from Adam's olden days compared to today, where no one has a good work ethic. Orlando tells Adam that, unfortunately, he isn't able to pay him for work. Regardless, Orlando suggests that they go together and, when they've spent Adam's savings, they'll happen upon an untroubled place to live. Adam agrees to loyally join Orlando until his last breath, and, while Adam spent most of his 80 years here, he will live here no more. They exit.
Rosalind as Ganymede, Celia as Aliena, and Touchstone enter the forest of Arden. Rosalind laments that she is so tired she could betray her man's disguise and cry like a woman. Yet, she must suppress the urge and, basically, decides to act like a man and suck it up. Celia then asks Rosalind to bear with her because she can't go on any further. Rosalind then announces that they are in the forest of Arden. Touchstone jokes about proverbial Arden and how he is a fool because he'd rather be at home, but, as a traveler, he must be content. Then, Corin and Silvius enter mid-conversation. Corin is advising Silvius against his behavior towards a woman that Silvius is in love with. Silvius dismisses Corin's advice because, even though Corin was a lover in his youth, he's now too old and couldn't even guess how much Silvius loves this woman. Silvius argues that, if Corin was a true lover, he'd be able to remember his ridiculous behavior and fantasies formed by love. Corin admits he was drawn into thousands of imaginations that he has now forgotten. Silvius confirms that if Corin can't remember how love used to make him full of folly or talk his listeners' ears off praising his love or break off from his company abruptly, he is not loved. Silvius then shouts his love Phoebe's name 3 times and abruptly exits.
Rosalind, watching, empathizes with Silvius the shepherd, who ran off to search for Phoebe because she finds herself in a similar situation. Touchstone says that he too remembers his situation courting Jane Smile. Touchstone's story is a body recounting of him giving a customary love gift to Jane that points out that all people naturally will die, and all people in love naturally also die for their delusions of love.
Celia then begs either Rosalind or Touchstone to ask Corin if he will sell them any food because she is starving. Touchstone yells at Corin and calls him a clown. Rosalind tries to quiet Touchstone and tells him that Corin is neither Touchstone's relation nor a clown like him. Corin asks who is calling. Touchstone responds that they are Corin's superiors. Corin replies that, if they are less off than him, they would be very miserable. Rosalind shushes Touchstone. Rosalind as Ganymede greets Corin and asks if love or money can take them to a place to sleep and eat, pointing out Celia as Aliena is hungry and may faint. Corin feels sorry for Aliena, but doesn't have the money to help her. Plus, he is employed by an absentee landlord who is unfriendly, doesn't believe in hospitality, and doesn't even have anything to offer, because the cottage, sheep, and pasture are currently for sale. Regardless, Corin invites them to go and see for themselves. Rosalind as Ganymede asks who is going to buy the property, and Corin says that's Shepherd Silvius, though Silvius doesn't care about buying anything at the moment. Rosalind as Ganymede encourages Corin to buy the cottage with money from them, and Celia as Aliena adds that they'll increase Corin's wages. Corin says that if they like the place, he will be their shepherd and buy the cottage and pasture with their money immediately. All exit.
Amiens, Jaques, and other lords dressed as foresters enter the forest. Amiens sings a song about a free bird singing a song, and all join in to sing with Amiens. Jaques requests more singing, and Amiens replies that his song will make Jaques melancholy. Jaques thanks Amiens for the warning, but ensures that he can suck melancholy out of a song. Amiens says that his voice is discordant and thinks it won't please Jaques. Jaques responds that he doesn't want Amiens to please him, Jaques wants more singing. Amiens agrees to sing more at Jaques' insistence.
But first, Amiens tells the group that they need to prepare the table for the Duke's meal. The Duke is going to dine here after he has spent all day looking for Jaques. Jaques, on the other hand, says he has spent all day avoiding the Duke because the Duke is too argumentative for Jaques' company. Jaques requests Amiens continue to sing. Amiens sings a song about shunning ambition, the curse of the courts, in preference for open air, and invites those looking for meal to come gather around, and all join in to sing with Amiens. When that song ends, Jaques offers Amiens a song verse that he wrote to the tune they've been singing, and Amiens agrees to sing it. Jaques gives Amiens a paper, and Amiens sings Jaques' parody verse about a man who becomes a fool and leaves his wealth and privilege to please his desires and invites other fools to join him, and all join in to sing. When the song ends, Amiens says he will go get the Duke because the banquet is ready. All exit.
Orlando and Adam enter another part of the forest. Adam tells Orlando that he cannot go any further because he will die of hunger, and says he will lie down here and prepare to die. Adam then wishes his master Orlando farewell. Orlando asks if Adam is not more courageous and advises Adam to keep living. Orlando says that if the forest has any wild animals, Orlando will either be food for the animal or he will bring Adam some wild animal as food. Orlando then assures Adam that it's only Adam's imagination convincing him that he is closer to death than he really is, and encourages him to keep living for Orlando's sake. Orlando decides he will get Adam food, but warns that if Adam dies before Orlando returns, this will be a mockery of Orlando's labor. Orlando notices Adam has cheered up and promises to bring food. Orlando says he will carry Adam to shelter, promising that Adam will not die of hunger. They exit.
Duke Sr., Amiens, and lords dressed as outlaws enter. Duke Sr. jokes to the group that he thinks Jaques was transformed into a beast because he is not shaped like a man. The First Lord says that Jaques was recently here and was happy listening to a song. Duke Sr. commands the Lord to find Jaques because Duke Sr. wants to talk. Just then, Jaques enters, saving the Lord a trip. Duke Sr. greets Jaques by asking him what sort of existence this is because Jaques' friends need to go seek him out in order to hang out with him. Duke Sr. then notes Jaques looks happy. Jaques tells a eulogy about a fool he met in the forest who laid down and basked in the sun and complained about Lady Fortune and maxims. When Jaques greeted the fool countered Jaques, saying he cannot be a fool until he has been sent a fortune. The fool then pulled a pocket timepiece out and talked about the hourly progression of time and humans aging from youth to old age. Jaques shares that when he heard the fool moralize about the time, he, Jaques, laughed for an hour straight because of how profoundly meditative fools could be. Jaques compliments the fool and his motley outfit.
Duke Sr. asks which fool this is, and Jaques continues to eulogize that he was a worthy fool who had been a courtier who talked about the confidence of ladies of the court. Jaques notes that the fool's mind was dry and stuffed with reflections that he recounted in jumbled forms. Jaques then wishes he were a fool and aspires to have a motley coat. Duke Sr. responds that Jaques shall have a motley coat. Jaques begs Duke Sr. this is his only plea, and Duke Sr. must no longer think that Jaques is a wise man. Jaques continues that he must have the freedom or license to fool around with any person he pleases and provoke people to laugh. Jaques rhetorically asks why people must laugh at the fool, and answers himself, the wise person must laugh and seem indifferent to the fool's jibes. Otherwise, he looks stupid as his folly is exposed in front of everyone. Jaques requests to be clothed in official robes and be given permission to go out and speak his mind to cleanse the world through his jokes.
Duke Sr. tells Jaques that he will be hypocritical if he's scolding people's sins because he, Jaques, has been a libertine. Duke Sr. warns that freedom has given Jaques sores and diseases, perhaps metaphoric or literal, that he would infect into the world. Jaques counters that if he, Jaques, criticizes pride, does that mean he's criticizing one particular person? What woman has he named if he says something about a generic woman? What woman can come to him and claim that Jaques meant her when she is similar to her neighbors? Or what about a man who, thinking Jaques is talking about him, makes his own foolishness fit Jaques' description? If this man accuses Jaques of talking about him, then the man has slandered himself by telling the truth. If a man is blameless, Jaques' claims won't be claimed by any man.
Orlando enters with his sword drawn and demands the group stop and don't eat anymore. Jaques responds that he has not eaten anything yet. Orlando says that they shall not eat until what must be done is done. Jaques is taken aback by Orlando's aggression, and Duke Sr. is taken aback by Orlando's distress and bad manners. Orlando confirms that he is in distress, but says that he was brought up in the court and does no good breeding. However, Orlando then warns that anyone who touches the food before his affairs are answered will die. Duke Sr. asks what Orlando wants and suggests that Orlando's kindness would get him more than force would. Orlando says he is about to die from hunger and demands they give him food. Duke Sr. invites Orlando to eat with them at the table.
Orlando is taken aback by Duke Sr.'s kindness and apologizes for his behavior, seeing as he thought he needed to act wild and uncivilized out here, so he put on this savage countenance. However, whoever Duke Sr. is here in the forest, and if he's seen better days, such as in the city, Orlando asks for his good manners to persuade them that he's embarrassed by his rudeness, and he puts the sword away. Duke Sr. confirms that he has seen better days and can relate to the city life Orlando talked about. Duke Sr. then invites Orlando to sit down and accept the help they can give. Orlando requests that they wait to eat their food for a moment while he goes to find Adam to give Adam food first, because Adam is both old and hungry. Duke Sr. affirms they will not eat until Orlando returns. Orlando thanks Duke Sr. and exits.
Duke Sr. tells the group that they can see they are not the only unfortunate people out there. He says that this universal theater, life, presents more sad plays than the one scene they play in. Jaques then delivers a speech about the world being a stage, in which people are actors who follow stage directions and act out different parts based on the 7 stages of their life, from birth to death. Those 7 stages are wailing infant, whining schoolboy, sighing lover, soldier, justice, pantaloon, or a stock comic old man, and second childishness, or really, really old age. As Jaques concludes his bleak description of old age, Orlando enters, carrying Adam.
Duke Sr. welcomes Orlando and invites him to set down Adam so Adam can eat. Orlando thanks Duke Sr. on Adam's behalf, as Adam can barely speak. Duke Sr. tells them to begin eating, and he will wait to ask them about their situation later. Duke Sr. requests music, and Amian sings a song about a winter wind that, though rough, is not as cruel as false friendships. Duke Sr. tells Orlando that if Orlando is Sir Roland's son, as Orlando said, and as Duke Sr.'s eyes can see based on their likeness, Orlando is welcome here. Duke Sr. introduces himself as a friend to Orlando's father. Duke Sr. asks Orlando to go to his cave and tell him the rest of the situation. Duke Sr. also tells Adam that he, like his master, is welcome and commands his lords to support Adam by the arm. Duke Sr. tells Orlando to give him his hand, and Duke Sr. tells Orlando to give him his hand. Duke Sr. tells Orlando to give him his hand and let him understand Orlando's circumstances. All exit.
Back at court, Duke Frederick, some lords, and Oliver enter. Duke Frederick cannot believe that no one has found Orlando yet. Duke Frederick states that if he were not a merciful man, he would forget about Orlando and instead get his revenge on Oliver in Orlando's place. Duke Frederick commands Oliver to go out and find Orlando, bring him, dead or alive, within the year, or else Oliver will no longer live in Duke Frederick's territory. Additionally, all of Oliver's land and belongings will be seized by the Duke until Oliver can exonerate himself by bringing Orlando in as a witness. Oliver wishes Duke Frederick could know his heart and claims he never loved his brother, Orlando. Duke Frederick commands his lords to throw Oliver out and tells his hired men to make a valuation of Oliver's house and lands speedily. All exit.
In the forest of Arden, Orlando enters with a paper and says that he will hang this paper with his verse as a witness for his love. He tells the moon goddess to see from above her nymph's name that governs his life. Orlando then names his love, Rosalind, and how he will inscribe his thoughts about her in the trees like a book, so everyone in the forest will see Rosalind's virtue described. Orlando then announces he will run and carve Rosalind on every tree. Orlando exits.
Corin and Touchstone enter, and Corin asks Touchstone how he likes the shepherd's life. Touchstone patronizes Corin about how the shepherd life is a good life, but goes back and forth between things that are good, it is solitary, in the fields, and frugal, to things that are bad, it is worthless, lonely, not in the court, and lacking excess. Touchstone asks Corin if he has any wisdom in him, to which Corin shares his simple wisdoms about sickness, money, and means, the elements, raising sheep, nighttime, and that a person who is not witty might blame that he comes from dull parents or bad upbringing. Touchstone calls Corin a philosopher.
Then, Touchstone asks Corin if Corin was ever in the court, and Corin says no. Touchstone tells Corin that Corin is damned because, if he has never been in the court, he has never seen good manners, and is thus wicked and damned, which is a bad state. Corin counters that the manners of the court are viewed as ridiculous behavior in the country. Court behavior is appropriate at the court, and country behavior is appropriate in the country. For example, Corin argues that those in the court do not kiss on the cheek, but kiss on the hand. But the custom of kissing on the hand would be inappropriate in the country, where people handle sheep and their greasy fleece. Touchstone thinks this argument is shallow, because the courtier's hands sweat, and the sweat of a man is similar to the grease of a sheep's fleece. Touchstone demands another argument. Corin argues that the shepherd's hands are hard from work, but Touchstone views this as a shallow argument and demands another. Corin argues that shepherds' hands are covered in tar from tending to their work wounds and asks Touchstone if he'll have them kiss tar. In contrast, the courtier's hands are covered in perfume. Touchstone calls Corin shallow and schools Corin, stating the perfume used by courtiers is made from civet secretion, which is much filthier than tar. Touchstone basically mic drops and commands Corin to improve his arguments.
Corin accepts his defeat in this battle of wits. Touchstone asks if Corin will rest even though he is still damned. Corin replies that he is a laborer who earns what he eats and wears, and he has no envy for other men's happiness. Corin's greatest pride is to see his sheep graze and lambs feed. Touchstone thinks this is another foolish sin in Corin because his entire livelihood is dependent on his livestock. Touchstone doesn't know how Corin could escape his damnation.
Rosalind as Ganymede enters with the paper and joins Touchstone and Corin. Rosalind as Ganymede reads the paper's contents. It is a verse that compares many valuable things as insufficient in worth compared to Rosalind. Touchstone insults the poem's rhyme as easily replicable and monotonous. Rosalind as Ganymede tells Touchstone to go away, but Touchstone recreates the verse by comparing both common and bawdy things to Rosalind. Touchstone insults this rhyming style and asks Rosalind as Ganymede why he is invested in this verse. Rosalind as Ganymede says he found the paper on a tree.
Celia as Aliena enters, also with a paper. Rosalind as Ganymede points out that Celia as Aliena is reading and tells Touchstone and Corin to step aside. Celia as Aliena reads the paper's content. The poet writes that they will hang poems on every tree that reflect the talk happening in the city, some about the brevity of life, some about broken promises, but on the most beautiful branches, or at the end of every sentence, they'll write Rosalinda. So every person who can read will know the purest form of every spirit is contained in this person and the graces and best features spread through all women are filled within her one body. The poem concludes that heaven wanted Rosalind to have these gifts, and the poet must live and die as Rosalind's slave.
Rosalind as Ganymede comes forward and comments on the tedious sermon of love Celia as Aliena has read aloud. Celia as Aliena is taken aback and tells her friends to move back. Celia as Aliena tells Corn the shepherd and Touchstone to leave, and Corn and Touchstone exit.
Celia asks Rosalind if Rosalind heard the verses that she read. Rosalind confirms that she did, and she read more verses too. Rosalind criticizes the verses' structure, claiming they have an excess of feet, as in metrical units, that the verse couldn't handle. Celia dismisses Rosalind's criticism to get to the point. Does Rosalind wonder how her name ended up hanged and carved onto the trees? Rosalind responds that she was almost done wondering about it before Celia showed up, and now she has found one on a palm tree. Celia asks Rosalind if she knows who has done this. Rosalind asks if it's a man. Celia thinks it's a man who wears a necklace that Rosalind once wore around her neck, and that this is wonderful, which she repeats 5 times. Rosalind exclaims that even though she is dressed as a man, she doesn't have a man's patience and urges Celia to find the shortest and quickest way to reveal the identity of the poet. Celia says she thinks the poet is the young Orlando who conquered the wrestler and Rosalind's heart in the same moment. Rosalind thinks Celia is mocking her and asks her to be more serious and speak truthfully. However, Celia promises Rosalind that she thinks the man is Orlando.
At this news, Rosalind asks what she should do about her men's clothing. Rosalind then asks Celia a series of questions. What was Orlando doing when Celia saw him? What did he say? How did he look? Where did he go? Why is he here? Did he ask for her? Does he know Rosalind is in the forest dressed as a man? Etc., etc. Celia tells Rosalind that she saw Orlando under a tree, lying on the ground like a wounded knight and dressed like a hunter. Rosalind interrupts Celia throughout her story due to excitement and justifies her excessive talking as a quality tied to a woman's nature. And right on cue, Orlando and Jaques enter.
Rosalind notices Orlando and tells Celia to creep past him and take note of him. Jaques tells Orlando that he thanks Orlando for his company, but would like to be by himself. Orlando agrees and, because it's the custom, thanks Jaques for his company. In their farewell, Jaques and Orlando butt heads. First, Jaques tells Orlando to stop writing poems in the trees, and Orlando tells Jaques to stop reading them so badly. Next, Jaques tells Orlando that he does not like Orlando's love Rosalind's name, and Orlando responds that Rosalind was not named to please Jaques. Next, Jaques tells Orlando that he is full of pretty answers and asks if Orlando has stolen rings and memorized the verses in them. Orlando says no, but he has studied the stock sayings of the painted wall hangings where Jaques learned all the questions he's asking. Jaques compliments Orlando's wit and invites Orlando to sit down to commiserate about their misery. But Orlando says he will not blame anyone but himself, for he knows his own faults. Jaques retorts that the worst fault of Orlando's is that Orlando is in love. Orlando responds that he will not change this fault for any virtue and dismisses Jaques. Jaques tells Orlando that he was looking for a fool when he found Orlando. Orlando tells Jaques to look in the brook to find the fool, but Jaques says that he'd just see his own reflection, who Orlando responds, is a fool. What a known. Jaques decides he doesn't want to stay with Orlando any longer and exits.
Rosalind tells the audience that she will speak to Orlando like an impudent serving boy and, under that disguise, act the part of a roguish youth. Rosalind as Ganymede greets Orlando and asks Orlando for the time. Orlando tells Ganymede that he should ask Orlando for the time of day, since there are no clocks in the forest. Rosalind as Ganymede responds that this means there must not be any lover in the forest, because lovers cannot sigh every minute and groan every hour and mark the slow progress of time. Orlando asks Ganymede why he says slow progress and not swift progress. Wouldn't that be just as accurate? Rosalind as Ganymede points out that time moves different speeds for different people, and Rosalind as Ganymede tells Orlando who time strolls with, trots with, gallops with, and stands still with.
Orlando asks Ganymede where he lives. Rosalind, as Ganymede, answers that he lives with his sister, a shepherdess, in the outskirts of the forest. Orlando asks Ganymede if he is a native of the forest. Rosalind, as Ganymede, responds that he is as native as the wild rabbit born in the forest. But Orlando points out Ganymede's accent is more refined than one acquired in a remote dwelling. Rosalind, as Ganymede, responds that he's been told this by many others, and an old religious uncle of his taught him to speak based on his upbringing in the court, where he learned courtly manners and fell in love. Rosalind, as Ganymede, adds that he's heard his uncle read many sermons against falling in love, and therefore is glad he is not a woman charged with the offenses his uncle has accused of the female sex. Orlando asks Ganymede if he remembers the greatest evils his uncle charged of women. Rosalind, as Ganymede, says that there were no greatest ones. They were each small and monstrous until the next fault came along to match it. Orlando asks again for Ganymede to recount some faults, but Rosalind, as Ganymede, refuses.
Instead, Rosalind as Ganymede changes the subject and brings up a man who is hurting young trees by carving the name Rosalind on their bark and hangs poems of praise on hawthorns and love poems on the brambles to deify the name Rosalind. Rosalind as Ganymede says he would like to meet the poet to give good counsel. Orlando admits that he is the love-shaken man and asks Ganymede to tell him a remedy for love. Rosalind as Ganymede observes that there aren't any marks on Orlando, for Rosalind as Ganymede's uncle taught him how to identify a man in love. But Rosalind as Ganymede does not think Orlando is in love. Orlando asks what are the marks. Rosalind as Ganymede lists the marks: lean cheeks, sunken eyes, moodiness, neglected beard, and disheveled appearance, but Orlando has none of these. Instead, Rosalind as Ganymede says that Orlando is fastidiously attentive to detail, as if he loves himself more than any other. Orlando wishes he could convince Ganymede that he is in love.
Rosalind, as Ganymede, instead tells Orlando that he needs to make the woman that he loves believe that he is in love with her, and guarantees that a woman is more likely to know when a man loves her versus that she loves you. He notes that this is a contradiction of women. They lie to their innermost convictions. But Rosalind as Ganymede asks again if Orlando is the man who hangs the verses that admire Rosalind on the trees. Orlando swears that he is the unfortunate man. Rosalind as Ganymede asks Orlando if he is as in love as his poems suggest, and Orlando replies that neither rhyme nor reason can express how much he's in love. Rosalind as Ganymede warns Orlando that love is madness and that he deserves to be treated like a madman. But men in love are not punished and cured like lunatics because the whippers are in love too. Instead, Rosalind as Ganymede will cure Orlando through counsel. Orlando asks if Ganymede has ever cured anyone, and Rosalind as Ganymede affirms, then explains how. The man in love imagined Rosalind as Ganymede as his love, and wooed Ganymede as Rosalind every day. Ganymede as Rosalind, in return, acted so like a woman, for example, moody, inconsistent, loving, proud, shallow, passionate, distant, etc., etc., that he drove the suitor from his mad humor of love to a humor of madness, where he renounced the secular world for the cell of a monk. Thus, Ganymede as Rosalind cured the suitor and can do the same for Orlando.
Orlando responds that he does not want to be cured, but Rosalind as Ganymede says that he will cure Orlando if Orlando will call him Rosalind and come every day to his cottage and woo him. Orlando changes his mind and says he will come to the cottage and woo Ganymede as Rosalind if Rosalind as Ganymede tells him where the cottage is. Rosalind as Ganymede says he will show Orlando and that Orlando should tell Rosalind as Ganymede where he lives in the forest. Orlando agrees to the plan, and Rosalind as Ganymede tells Orlando to call him Rosalind. Rosalind as Ganymede calls Celia as Aliena and invites her to go with them. All exit.
Touchstone, Audrey, and Jaques, watching them, enter. Touchstone tells Audrey to come along and that he will round up her goats. Touchstone asks Audrey what she thinks. Is he the man yet? And does she like his simple features? Audrey asks Touchstone what features. Touchstone tells Audrey that he is here with her and her goats, just as the lascivious poet Ovid was among the Goths, pronounced goats. Jaques, in an aside to the audience, notes that Touchstone's knowledge is poorly housed in this fool's head, like gods living in an unworthy hut. Touchstone comments that when a man's verses and jokes cannot be understood, it's disappointing. Touchstone wishes the gods had made Audrey more poetical. Audrey tells Touchstone that she doesn't know what poetical means and asks if it is honest in deed and word and being truthful. Touchstone answers no, because while the truest poetry by lovers shows the greatest desire or love, it also shows the greatest fantasy, which is a lie. Audrey asks Touchstone if he wishes the gods made her poetical. Touchstone says yes, because Audrey has sworn that she is honest, meaning a virgin, but if she were a poet, she might have lied about her honesty, or virginity. Audrey asks Touchstone if he doesn't want her to be honest, a virgin, and Touchstone says no, unless you were ugly, because being both honest, a virgin, and beautiful is to have too much of a good thing. Jaques, in an aside to the audience, comments on how Touchstone is a fool with a point. Audrey tells Touchstone that, since the gods have not made her beautiful, she prays the gods make her honest, a virgin. Touchstone agrees because chastity is wasted on ugly sluts, just like good meat is wasted when it's put on a dirty dish. Audrey says she is not a slut, and thanks the gods she is homely. Touchstone also praises the gods for her homeliness, noting that sluttishness can come after.
Touchstone then announces he will marry Audrey and has previously met with Sir Oliver Martext, the vicar in the next village, who has promised to marry them here in the forest. Jaques, in an aside to the audience, says he would like to see this wedding, and Audrey celebrates the news. Touchstone talks about how a man may be nervous to marry outside of the temple and in the woods and uses an extended metaphor about cuckoldry and horned beasts. Touchstone concludes, though, that to be a cuckold, a married man, is more honorable than having a bachelor's bare forehead. For a horn on your head, a wife, is better than no horn at all, being a bachelor.
Sir Oliver Martext enters. Touchstone announces Sir Oliver's entrance and welcomes him. Touchstone asks if Sir Oliver will marry him and Audrey here under this tree, or if they should go with him to his chapel. Sir Oliver asks if anyone is here to give away Audrey, and that she must be given away or the marriage is not lawful. Jaques approaches and offers to give Audrey away. Touchstone greets Jaques by either forgetting Jaques' name or using an under-the-radar privy joke. Jaques asks if Touchstone wants to get married. Touchstone affirms that he is getting married. Jaques asks Touchstone if he will be married under a bush like a beggar, insulting the forest and the priest, and advises Touchstone to get to a church and to be married by a proper priest who can teach him marriage obligations. Touchstone replies that he'd rather be married by Sir Oliver, who likely won't marry them properly or legally, making it easier to leave his wife. Jaques tells Touchstone to join him for counsel. Touchstone tells Audrey to come because they must be married or they will live in an unchaste way. Touchstone says goodbye to Sir Oliver and sings a song about how he won't be married by Sir Oliver. Touchstone, Audrey, and Jaques exit. Sir Oliver says he isn't bothered because a knave won't mock him out of his calling. Sir Oliver exits.
Rosalind as Ganymede and Celia as Aliena enter. Rosalind tells Celia to not talk because she'll cry. Celia says Rosalind can cry, but asks her to consider that men do not cry. Rosalind asks Celia if she doesn't have a good reason to cry. Celia affirms that Rosalind does have a good reason and that she should cry. That reason for crying is Orlando's attractive features, which Rosalind and Celia gush about, especially his auburn hair and kissable lips. Rosalind then asks Celia why Orlando said he would come this morning but hasn't. Celia replies that it's because Orlando's love is shallow and not truthful. Rosalind counters that Celia heard Orlando swear that he was in love, but Celia points out that was is not is. Plus, lovers' oaths can be false.
Celia then tells Rosalind that Orlando has been staying in the forest with her father, Duke Sr. Rosalind shares that she met with Duke Sr. yesterday, and Rosalind as Ganymede told Duke Sr. his parentage is as good as the Duke, which made Duke Sr. laugh. Rosalind asks why they're talking about fathers when there's men such as Orlando. Celia says that Orlando is a showy man who writes, speaks, and swears in a showy way. And he also breaks oaths in a showy way. But that's because young men and fools are showy.
Corn enters and tells his mistress, Aliena, and Master Ganymede that the shepherd that they saw sitting on the grass with Corn, lamenting about love and praising his proud disdainful shepherdess, is now with her, and they are putting on a show. It is a show between his love and her scorn. Corin tells Ganymede and Aliena that he will take them to see it, if they want to see it. Rosalind as Ganymede says he and Aliena will go with him to see the lovers, and Rosalind as Ganymede will also involve himself in the situation like an actor in a play. All exit.
Silvius and Phoebe enter. Silvius asks Phoebe to not scorn him and instead say that she loves him, but she should not say it in bitterness. Silvius asks Phoebe to not be cruel like the executioner and spare him. Rosalind as Ganymede, Celia as Aliena, and Corin enter, but they stand aside. Phoebe tells Silvius that she doesn't want to hurt him. In fact, Phoebe admits that she avoids Silvius because she doesn't want to hurt him. But now, Phoebe says she is frowning at Silvius with all her might and, if her eyes could hurt, then let them kill him. Phoebe tells Silvius to pretend to faint and fall down because of her eyes, but if he won't, don't lie and say that her eyes are murderers. Phoebe demands Silvius show her the wound her eyes gave him, and then concludes that Silvius can't because her eyes cannot hurt him. Silvius counters that if Phoebe ever fell in love, she would know the invisible wounds love's arrow can make. Phoebe tells Silvius that until that time, he shouldn't come near her, and when that time does come, Silvius can go ahead and mock her, but never pity her like she does not pity him.
Rosalind as Ganymede advances and asks Phoebe who raised her in a way that has allowed her to insult this poor man Silvius. Rosalind as Ganymede tells Phoebe that she is nothing much to look at, so why is she so proud and pitiless? He continues that he doesn't see more in her than anything ordinary, and accuses Phoebe of also trying to catch Ganymede's affections, like she did with the shepherd. But Phoebe cannot ensnare Ganymede. Rosalind as Ganymede tells Silvius that he is a properer man than Phoebe is a woman, and that Silvius is a fool because it is not Phoebe's mirror, but him, Silvius, that flatters her to the point that this flattery has gone to her head. Thus, Rosalind as Ganymede advises Phoebe to thank heaven for a good man's love, because Phoebe is not for everyone and should apologize to Silvius. Rosalind as Ganymede then advises Silvius to take Phoebe to be his wife and says farewell.
Phoebe then asks Ganymede to keep scolding her because she'd rather hear Ganymede scold her than Silvius woo her. Rosalind as Ganymede says that Silvius has fallen in love with Phoebe's meanness and tells Silvius that now Phoebe has fallen in love with Ganymede's anger. Rosalind as Ganymede decides that, like Phoebe frowning at Silvius, he will respond in bitter words to Phoebe. Rosalind as Ganymede asks Phoebe why she's looking at him like that. Phoebe replies she doesn't mean Ganymede any harm. Rosalind as Ganymede tells Phoebe that she shouldn't fall in love with him because he is false and doesn't like her. Rosalind as Ganymede then tells Silvius where he lives, asks Aliena if she's ready to leave, advises Phoebe to think better of Silvius and not be proud, and tells Aliena and Corin it's time to leave. Rosalind as Ganymede, Celia as Aliena, and Corin exit.
Phoebe tells Silvius that she now understands what he meant earlier about falling in love at first sight. Silvius asks Phoebe again to pity him, and this time, Phoebe says that she does pity gentle Silvius. Silvius tells Phoebe that she could cure him of his grief if she would love him back. Phoebe tells Silvius he has her neighborly love. Is that not enough? But Silvius wants her. Phoebe explains that Silvius is just being greedy. While she used to hate him, she still doesn't love him. Although, since Silvius talks so well about love, Phoebe will put up with Silvius so that he can help her. But Silvius shouldn't expect anything from it besides the happiness of helping her. Silvius says that his love for her is so great, he'll take this arrangement. Phoebe asks Silvius if he knows the youth who is just here. Silvius answers, not well, and tells Phoebe that Ganymede just bought old Carlot's cottage and land. Phoebe tells Silvius that she's not in love with the youth just because she's asking about him. Phoebe claims that Ganymede is annoying, then catalogs his parts, his speech, looks, pride, height, lips, and concludes that most women would instantly fall in love with Ganymede. Phoebe doesn't hate or love Ganymede, even though she has cause to hate him because of how Ganymede scolded and insulted her, and she's surprised she didn't talk back at him. Instead, Phoebe will write a letter to Ganymede, and she asks Silvius to deliver the letter. Silvius agrees, and Phoebe says she'll write it straight away, and write what's in her head and heart, and be bitter and short with him. They exit.
Rosalind as Ganymede, Celia as Aliena, and Jaques enter, and Jaques asks to get to know Ganymede better. Rosalind as Ganymede replies that he has heard others say that Jaques is a melancholy fellow, and Jaques admits that yes, he is, and he likes being melancholy better than laughing. Rosalind as Ganymede replies that anyone who is at the extremes of laughing or being melancholy is terrible to be around. Jaques says then it is better to be melancholy and say nothing, and Rosalind as Ganymede replies that it would be better to be a fence post. Jaques replies that his melancholy is unique to him, made up from various elements that stem from his travels to foreign lands and his continued rumination on these past travels. Rosalind as Ganymede replies that Jaques has reason to be sad, since he has sold his lands in order to explore the lands of others, and now has seen much but has nothing to show for it. Jaques replies that he does have something: experience.
Orlando enters as Rosalind as Ganymede responds to Jaques that Jaques' experience is what makes him sad, and Rosalind as Ganymede would rather have a fool to make him merry than experiences he had to travel for to make him sad. Orlando greets Rosalind, but don't forget, Orlando thinks he is speaking to Ganymede pretending to be Rosalind instead, and doesn't know that he's actually speaking to Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind. Oh boy, oh girl. Jaques excuses himself since Orlando is speaking in blank verse, the language of lovers, and Jaques exits. Rosalind as Ganymede mocks Jaques' Frenchness and his distaste for his own country, since he spends his time thinking of his travels to other lands.
Then, Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind chides Orlando for arriving late. Orlando replies that he has arrived within an hour of their appointed meeting time. Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind continues to reprimand Orlando and says that it would be better to be wooed by a snail because the snail brings his house and his destiny of being cuckolded with him. Orlando replies that his Rosalind is virtuous, and therefore he has no fear of cuckoldry. Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind says that she is Orlando's Rosalind, possibly dropping the act of Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind, or blurring the lines between her disguise and her identity a little too much. Either way, Celia as Aliena covers this by saying that Orlando might be happy to call Ganymede Rosalind, but Orlando's real Rosalind is prettier than Ganymede.
Rosalind as Ganymede recovers and invites Orlando to woo him as if he were Orlando's Rosalind. Rosalind as Ganymede asks what Orlando would say to his Rosalind. Orlando says he would kiss before he spoke. Rosalind as Ganymede replies that it would be better if Orlando spoke first, and when he and Rosalind run out of things to talk about, then they can kiss. Orlando asks, what if Rosalind denies him? Rosalind as Ganymede says that then Rosalind would be making Orlando petition for consent before kissing, and thus conversation would begin again.
Orlando asks who could be out of things to say when he is in front of his beloved. Rosalind as Ganymede replies that Orlando should, because otherwise Rosalind's chastity is worth more than her sexual skills. What a bawdy thing to say! And this begins a back and forth where Rosalind as Ganymede has some wordplay about suits, both referring to clothing and comparing Orlando's wooing to a legal case.
Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind eventually rejects Orlando, who then says he, Orlando, will die. Rosalind as Ganymede says Orlando should only die by proxy because in the history of the world, there has never been a man who has died from a broken heart. Rosalind as Ganymede then lists off some of the great romantic heroes of Greek myth and explains how they died from other causes. He continues, saying that the historians were lying when they said these great men died for love, and repeats that men have never died for love. Orlando says he hopes his real Rosalind doesn't share this opinion, as he believes a frown from her would kill him. Rosalind as Ganymede swears that a frown from Orlando's Rosalind would not kill a fly. Then, Rosalind as Ganymede says that he will pretend to be Orlando's Rosalind in a more encouraging mood, and tells Orlando to ask for anything, and Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind will grant it.
Orlando asks Ganymede as Rosalind to love him, and Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind says that she will, every day of the week. Orlando asks Ganymede as Rosalind if she will have him as her husband, and Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind replies that she will, and 20 more like him. Orlando asks why she would say that, and Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind asks if Orlando is good. He replies he hopes so, And Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind asks, can one want too much of a good thing?
Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind asks Celia as Aliena to play the priest and marry Orlando and Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind. They have a mock wedding ceremony. Then Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind asks Orlando how long he would love her after they are married. Orlando replies forever and a day. And Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind replies that he can't say that as people change after they are married, and she will be noisy, jealous, and volatile as a wife. Orlando asks if his Rosalind will do so too, and Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind replies that yes, she will. Orlando argues that his wife Rosalind is wise, and Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind argues that the wiser the wife, the more wayward she can be.
After some back and forth about wise wives, Orlando says that he must leave Ganymede as Rosalind for 2 hours. Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind says that she cannot do without him for 2 hours, but Orlando says he must have dinner with the Duke and will be back by 2 o'clock. Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind tells him to go and pretends to have heard from groups of gossiping courtiers that Orlando is a flatterer. Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind performs a mock resignation to pining for Orlando while he is away, then asks if he will indeed be back by 2 o'clock. He confirms this, and Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind makes him swear to be back by then. Orlando swears and exits.
Celia chides Rosalind for speaking so badly about women and says that they should remove Rosalind's doublet and hose to reveal that she is not Ganymede. Rosalind ignores this and tells Celia that she wishes Celia could understand how deep her love is for Orlando. Rosalind claims it has an unknown bottom like the depths of the sea. Celia counters that no, it is bottomless like a sieve and can run out. Rosalind says that only Cupid can judge how deeply she is in love. Rosalind says to Celia that she cannot bear to be out of sight of Orlando, so she will go find a shady place to sit and will sigh until he returns. Celia says she will sleep. They exit.
Elsewhere in the forest, Jaques, the lords, and the foresters enter. Jaques asks which of the lords killed the deer in the hunt, and one lord says he did. Jaques says that they should present this lord before the Duke like a Roman conqueror and set the deer's horns upon the lord's head like a Roman victory wreath. Jaques asks if the forester has a song for this, and the forester replies that he does. Jaques instructs the forester to sing, and the forester starts to sing a hunting song about a man who killed a deer and now wears its horns. Jaques tells the rest of the group to sing along, and they do as they exit.
2 hours have passed, and Rosalind as Ganymede and Celia as Aliena enter. Rosalind comments that it is past 2 o'clock, and Orlando has not returned. Celia teases that Orlando has gone to sleep. Silvius enters and delivers a letter from Phoebe to Ganymede. Silvius says that he does not know what the letter contains, but guesses that it has an angry message based on Phoebe's behavior while writing it. Silvius says he is just an innocent messenger. Rosalind as Ganymede reads the letter and says that its content would shock the personification of patience into being a swashbuckling braggart. Rosalind as Ganymede continues that Phoebe writes that Ganymede is not fair, lacks manners, is proud, and that Phoebe would not love him if men were as rare as a phoenix. Rosalind as Ganymede says that Phoebe's love is not what he seeks and wonders aloud why she would write this to him.
Rosalind as Ganymede then accuses Silvius of writing the letter. Silvius protests that Phoebe wrote it, and he doesn't know what it says. Rosalind as Ganymede says that Silvius is a fool and acts in the extremes of love. Rosalind as Ganymede says he saw Phoebe's hand, and it is like that of a working woman and looks like old leather. Therefore, Rosalind as Ganymede argues Phoebe did not write this letter, a man did. Silvius swears it is Phoebe's letter. Rosalind as Ganymede says that it is written like a challenge to a duel, and women's brains could not invent such words. Rosalind as Ganymede asks Silvius if he will hear the letter. Silvius agrees to this, again reiterating that he has not heard it yet, and noting that he is familiar with Phoebe's cruelty.
Rosalind as Ganymede reads the letter aloud, which is actually a love poem. Silvius asks if this is what Ganymede calls chiding. Celia as Aliena expresses pity for Silvius, and Rosalind as Ganymede says Silvius deserves no pity. Rosalind as Ganymede chides Silvius for loving Phoebe and tells him that if he is a true lover, Silvius will go back to Phoebe and tell her that if she loves Ganymede, then Ganymede charges her to love Silvius. If she will not, then Ganymede will never have her unless Silvius entreats Ganymede on her behalf. Rosalind as Ganymede tells Sylvius to go and not say anything as someone new is approaching.
Sylvius exits as Oliver Du Bois enters. Orlando's older brother, remember him? Oliver greets Ganymede and Aliena and asks if they know where in the forest is a shepherd's cottage surrounded by olive trees. Celia, as Aliena, gives Oliver directions but says that at this hour he won't find anyone there. Oliver then recognizes Ganymede and Aliena based on a description of their physical appearances and asks if Ganymede is the owner of the house he is looking for. Celia, as Aliena, responds that they are. Oliver then says that Orlando sends greetings, and to the youth who Orlando calls Rosalind, Orlando sends a bloody handkerchief. Oliver asks if Ganymede is indeed that youth. Rosalind, as Ganymede, confirms that he is this youth and asks what are they supposed to understand by this handkerchief. Oliver replies that they will understand his shame if they are to understand who he is and the details surrounding how the handkerchief was stained. Celia, as Aliena, invites him to tell the story.
Oliver explains that, although Orlando intended to be back within an hour, while he was walking through the forest, he saw a ragged-looking man sleeping under an old tree, and while the man slept, a snake had wrapped itself around the man's neck and was approaching the opening of the man's mouth. When the snake saw Orlando, it slinked off into a bush, where a hungry lioness was stalking the sleeping man. Orlando then approached the man and realized that it was his brother. Celia, as Aliena, comments that she has heard Orlando speak of that brother, and Orlando's account painted his brother as inhumane. Oliver says Orlando was right to say so, for Oliver agrees that the brother was inhumane. Rosalind, as Ganymede, asks if Orlando left his brother there to be food for the lioness, and Oliver responds that twice Orlando turned his back on his brother. However, Orlando's kindness overtook his desire for revenge, and he battled the lioness and won. And during the battle, Oliver says he woke up. Celia, as Aliena, and Rosalind, as Ganymede, ask if Oliver is the brother, if it was he who was rescued by Orlando, and if Oliver is the brother who conspired to kill Orlando. Oliver confirms that he was that brother, but he is no longer the same man who conspired to kill Orlando now that he has repented his old ways.
Rosalind, as Ganymede, asks, "What about the bloody handkerchief?" And Oliver responds that he will get to that in a minute. Oliver explains that after he and Orlando tearily recounted what had happened to both of them since they last parted, and how Oliver came to be in the forest, Orlando took Oliver to Duke Sr., who gave Oliver fresh clothes and hospitality. Duke Sr. then gave Oliver to Orlando's care, and Orlando took Oliver to his cave. Orlando started changing clothes, and they found that the lioness had wounded Orlando on the arm, which had been bleeding since the battle. Then Orlando fainted and cried out for Rosalind. Oliver sums up that he revived Orlando, bandaged Orlando's wound, and once Orlando was feeling a little better, Orlando sent Oliver to meet Ganymede and explain what happened in the hopes that Ganymede would forgive Orlando's broken promise. Furthermore, Oliver continues, Orlando instructed him to give the bloody handkerchief to the youth that Orlando calls Rosalind.
Rosalind, as Ganymede, faints, and Celia, as Aliena, goes to revive him. Oliver comments that many will swoon at the sight of blood. Celia, as Aliena, says that there is more to it than that, then calls Rosalind, as Ganymede, cousin, possibly forgetting their disguises for a moment. Rosalind, as Ganymede, recovers and asks to be taken home. Celia, as Aliena, asks Oliver to take Rosalind, as Ganymede, by the arm. Oliver tells Rosalind, as Ganymede, to be of good cheer, and questions that Ganymede is a man, as he seems to lack a man's heart. Rosalind, as Ganymede, replies that he does lack a man's heart, and says that the fainting was an act, and asks Oliver to tell Orlando how good of an act it was.
Then, Rosalind, as Ganymede, faints again, but revives quickly. Oliver says that Ganymede's fainting was not an act, as it is obvious from Ganymede's pale complexion that it was a genuine faint. Rosalind, as Ganymede, continues to claim that he was pretending to faint. Oliver says that Ganymede should buck up and pretend to be a man. Rosalind, as Ganymede, says he is, but he should have been a woman. Celia, as Aliena, says that Rosalind, as Ganymede, is looking paler and paler, so they should go home. Celia, as Aliena, invites Oliver to come with them, and he agrees, as he must return to Orlando with an answer of forgiveness from Rosalind. Rosalind, as Ganymede, says he will come up with something, and asks Oliver to tell Orlando what a good actor Rosalind, as Ganymede, is. They exit.
Touchstone and Audrey enter mid-conversation. Touchstone tells Audrey to be patient, as they will find time to get married. Audrey says that Sir Oliver Martext would have been a good enough priest. Never mind what Jaques had to say about it. Touchstone disagrees, then sees William approaching from a distance and says that William is a youth in the forest who lays claim to Audrey. Audrey says she knows who William is and that he actually has no interest in her.
William enters, and Audrey says that this is the man that Touchstone is referring to. Touchstone comments that it is like food and drink for him to see a rustic clown like William, and he cannot restrain himself from mocking William. William greets Audrey and Touchstone. Touchstone tells William to put his hat back on, then asks how old William is. William responds that he is 25. Touchstone continues to ask William some personal questions, like confirming his name is William, if he was born in the forest, if he is rich, and if he is wise. William basically answers yes to all of the above. Touchstone mocks William a little for thinking himself wise, then asks William if William loves Audrey. William says yes. Touchstone asks if William is educated, and William says no. Touchstone says that he will teach William something, and then tells William that he, Touchstone, is the man who will marry Audrey, and therefore William should stop pursuing her and leave Audrey's company, or else William will die. Touchstone uses some more advanced vocabulary at first, then repeats in more simple language that he, Touchstone, will kill William 150 ways. Therefore, William should leave now. Audrey says William should leave, and William bids Touchstone farewell and exits. Corin enters and says that Ganymede and Aliena are looking for Touchstone and to come to them with Corin. Touchstone tells Audrey to run or dance with him and tells Corin that he is on his way. All exit.
Orlando and Oliver enter mid-conversation. Orlando asks if it is possible that Oliver can love Aliena so quickly after meeting her, and she so quickly can be wooed by Oliver. Oliver tells Orlando not to question the irresponsibility or suddenness of this passion, nor Aliena's low-born status. Instead, Oliver says, Orlando should just accept that Oliver loves Aliena, Aliena loves Oliver, and Orlando should consent that they can be married. Oliver says that it will be Orlando's advantage, as Oliver will give their father's house and wealth to Orlando and stay in the forest to be a shepherd with Aliena.
Rosalind as Ganymede enters as Orlando gives his consent to Oliver, saying that Oliver and Aliena can be married tomorrow. Orlando will invite Duke Sr. and all his followers. Orlando tells Oliver to go prepare Aliena for the marriage ceremony as he sees his Rosalind. Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind greets Oliver as brother, and Oliver greets Ganymede as Rosalind as sister, then exits.
Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind tells Orlando that it grieves her to see his heart in a sling. Orlando replies that his arm is in the sling. Rosalind as Ganymede as Rosalind says that she thought his heart had been wounded by the lion. Orlando replies that his heart is wounded, but from the eyes of a lady. Rosalind as Ganymede asks if Oliver told Orlando about how he pretended to swoon when Oliver showed Ganymede and Aliena the bloody handkerchief. Orlando says yes, and even more wondrous things. Rosalind as Ganymede says he knows what Orlando is talking about and says that it is true. Oliver and Aliena fell in love at first sight and are now eager to be married, or else they will have sex outside of wedlock. Rosalind as Ganymede says that they are in the heat of love and are determined to be together. Nothing will stop them from getting married.
Orlando says that Aliena and Oliver will be married tomorrow, and he will tell Duke Sr. to come to the ceremony. However, Oliver's happiness in love will make Orlando melancholy tomorrow. Rosalind as Ganymede asks why he cannot help Orlando be married by pretending to be Rosalind tomorrow. Orlando says that imagining Rosalind is no longer sufficient. Rosalind as Ganymede says that he will no longer bother Orlando with just talking, but as Rosalind as Ganymede knows Orlando to be a good man, he asks Orlando to believe in Ganymede's ability to do some good for Orlando. Rosalind as Ganymede asks Orlando to believe that Ganymede can do some magical things because he has communicated with a magician since he was 3 years old who was skilled but also not a devil, an important distinction. Rosalind as Ganymede says that if Orlando loves Rosalind, then when Oliver marries Aliena, Orlando shall wed Rosalind. Rosalind as Ganymede says he knows where Rosalind is, and it is not impossible for him to bring her to Orlando tomorrow. Furthermore, this will be the real Rosalind, not some spirit that Ganymede can conjure up. And this will all be done with no danger to Rosalind or Orlando. Orlando asks if Ganymede is being serious right now, and Rosalind as Ganymede swears he is a magician, and therefore Orlando should get dressed in his best clothes tomorrow and tell everyone to come, because if Orlando wants to be married tomorrow, he will be, and to Rosalind, if Orlando wants to marry her.
Silvius and Phoebe enter, and Phoebe accuses Ganymede of much unkindness for showing Silvius the letter. Rosalind as Ganymede says he does not care if he has been unkind to Phoebe, as this was his intent. Rosalind as Ganymede points out that Phoebe is followed by the ever-faithful Silvius and should love him because he worships her. Phoebe tells Silvius to tell Ganymede what it is like to love. Silvius says it is to be made of sighs and tears, which is what he is for Phoebe. Phoebe says that is what she is for Ganymede. Orlando says that is what he is for Rosalind. Rosalind as Ganymede says he is that for no woman. Silvius then says that love is to be made of faith and service, and so he is for Phoebe. The sentiment passes around the room again. This is what Phoebe feels for Ganymede, what Orlando feels for Rosalind, and what Rosalind as Ganymede feels for no woman. Silvius then says that love is to be made up of longing, passion, desire, service, chivalry, etc., etc., and that is what he is for Phoebe. This passes around the group again. This is what Phoebe feels for Ganymede, what Orlando feels for Rosalind, and what Rosalind as Ganymede feels for no woman.
Phoebe then asks Ganymede if this is so, how can Ganymede blame her for loving him? Silvius repeats the question to Phoebe, and Orlando repeats the question to the unseen Rosalind. Rosalind as Ganymede asks who Orlando is speaking to, and he replies that he speaks to her that is not here. Rosalind as Ganymede begs for no more of this nonsense and tells Silvius that he will help Silvius if he can. Rosalind as Ganymede tells Phoebe that he would love her if he could, then says to the group that they will all meet here tomorrow. To Phoebe, Rosalind as Ganymede says that he will marry her if he ever marries a woman, and tomorrow he will be married. To Orlando, Rosalind as Ganymede says that he will keep his promise if ever he has kept his promise to another man, and Orlando will be married tomorrow. To Silvius, Rosalind as Ganymede says that he will make Silvius happy if what Silvius wants will make him happy, and Silvius will be married tomorrow. Then, back to Orlando, Rosalind as Ganymede says that if Orlando loves Rosalind, he will meet here. Then, to Silvius, Rosalind as Ganymede says that if Silvius loves Phoebe, he will meet here. And lastly, as Rosalind as Ganymede loves no woman, he'll meet here. Now, they can part with understanding their instructions. Silvius says he will be here or be dead, and Phoebe and Orlando agree. All exit.
Touchstone and Audrey enter, and Touchstone says that, tomorrow, they will be married. Audrey says that she desires this with all her heart, but she hopes it is not dishonest to desire to be a married woman. 2 pages, attendants of Duke Sr., enter and greet Touchstone. Touchstone invites the pages to sit with them and sing a song. The pages invite Touchstone and Audrey to sit in the middle, and after a brief discussion of it, they should just start singing or introduce the song. The pages sing a pastoral song about a lover and his lass falling in love in springtime. Touchstone says that, while that song had no substance to it, it was also out of tune. One of the pages objects, saying that they kept time. Touchstone says it was a waste of time to listen to that silly song, then tells them that he hopes God sends them better voices. Everyone exits.
It is now the day of the wedding, and Duke Sr., Amiens, Jaques, Orlando, Oliver, and Celia as Aliena enter. Duke Sr. asks if Orlando believes Ganymede can do everything Ganymede promised. Orlando wavers between faith and doubt. Then, Rosalind as Ganymede, Silvius, and Phoebe enter. Rosalind as Ganymede asks for Phoebe's patience once again until their agreement is finalized. Rosalind as Ganymede turns to Duke Sr. and asks if he, Ganymede, brings the Duke's daughter Rosalind here, does the Duke agree to give her hand in marriage to Orlando? Duke Sr. agrees. Rosalind as Ganymede asks Orlando if he will take Rosalind as his wife when Rosalind brings her here. Orlando agrees. Rosalind as Ganymede asks Phoebe if Phoebe agrees to marry Ganymede if Ganymede is willing, but if Phoebe refuses to marry Ganymede, she agrees to marry Silvius. Phoebe agrees to both, although she is more emphatic about agreeing to marry Ganymede. Rosalind as Ganymede turns to Silvius and asks if he will marry Phoebe if she is willing, and Silvius says he will, even if he were to die at the same time. Rosalind as Ganymede says that he has promised to bring all of the above agreements into balance and tells everyone to keep their words. He'll be right back. Rosalind as Ganymede and Celia as Aliena exit.
Duke Sr. comments to Orlando that Ganymede looks a little like his daughter Rosalind, and Orlando says he thought that Ganymede could be Rosalind's brother the first time Orlando saw him. Orlando tells Duke Sr. that Ganymede was born in the forest and was taught magic arts by his magician uncle in the forest. Touchstone and Audrey enter, and Jaques comments that another biblical flood must be coming because all sorts of couples are coming to meet here, and here is a pair of fools. Touchstone greets everyone, and Jaques tells Duke Sr. to welcome Touchstone, as Touchstone is the fool that Jaques had told Duke Sr. about, and Touchstone swears he was a courtier.
Touchstone says that if any man doubts he was a courtier, Touchstone has the means to prove it. Touchstone claims to have done several things courtiers do: danced, been diplomatic with friends and suave with enemies, bankrupted 3 tailors, and had 4 quarrels, and was likely to fight in one. Jaques asks how that one was settled, and Touchstone says he and the other party met and found the quarrel was on the 7th reason. Jaques asks Touchstone to explain, then turns to the Duke and tells him to like Touchstone. Duke Sr. agrees that he likes Touchstone a lot. Touchstone says he does desire to be liked by Duke Sr., as he has come to be married to Audrey today. Duke Sr. comments that Touchstone is very quick-witted and skilled with words. Touchstone replies, "It is the way of being a fool."
Jaques demands to know more about the 7th cause of the quarrel that Touchstone mentioned, and asks how Touchstone found the quarrel on the 7th cause. Touchstone says it was a lie that had been 7 times avoided, then interrupts himself to tell Audrey to behave herself. Touchstone says that he disliked the cut of another courtier's beard, and he and the courtier went back and forth about whether or not it was well cut, with the other courtier suggesting that Touchstone was a liar. The escalation of the lie parallels the various steps in a duel. Jaques asks how many times Touchstone said the man's beard was not well cut, and Touchstone says he didn't go further after the suggestion that he was a liar, and the man wouldn't call Touchstone a liar outright, so they compared the lengths of their swords and dropped the issue.
Jaques asks Touchstone to enumerate the degrees of the lie, and Touchstone repeats the steps of the escalation of a lie, again, much like the steps in a duel, noting that all of these can be avoided with an if, because saying if is a great peacemaker. Jaques asks Duke Sr. if Duke Sr. also finds Touchstone to be a rare fellow, gifted at many things, but who has chosen to be a fool. Duke Sr. agrees, noting that Touchstone uses the guise of foolishness to hide the sharp intelligence he uses to actually hit the target of his ridicule.
Then, Hymen, the classical deity of marriage ceremonies, enters with Rosalind and Celia, now both undisguised. Thank goodness. A musical underscore plays as Hymen says that heaven is joyful when things on earth are balanced. Hymen tells Duke Sr. to receive his daughter, who Hymen has brought from heaven to this forest, so that Duke Sr. may join Rosalind in marriage with the man she loves. Rosalind tells Duke Sr. and Orlando that she is their Rosalind. Both Duke Sr. and Orlando say that, if there is truth in what they see, she is definitely Rosalind. Phoebe says that if she believes what she sees, then she does not want to marry the person she thought was Ganymede. Rosalind says that she will have no father if Duke Sr. isn't her father, no husband if Orlando is not her husband, and still will not wed a woman other than Phoebe.
Hymen tells everyone, especially Rosalind, to shut up and forbids further confusion. Hymen then says that she will perform the marriage ceremony. Hymen blesses the unions of Celia with Oliver and Rosalind with Orlando. Hymen tells Phoebe that she needs to accept Silvius's love or have a woman for a husband. Hymen then says that Touchstone and Audrey are stuck together, like winter and foul weather. Hymen then says that while they sing a wedding hymn, everyone can satisfy themselves with questions and let answers diminish their sense of wonder about how all of this has happened. Hymen sings a song blessing the marriages, after which Duke Sr. welcomes Celia and Rosalind to his forest court. Phoebe consents to marry Silvius, deciding to love him.
Then, Jaques du Bois, the middleest brother of Orlando and Oliver, and not Jaques the fool, arrives. He asks for their attention, introduces himself as the second son of Sir Roland, and tells that Duke Frederick had gathered an army to storm the forest and arrest Duke Senior. However, on the outskirts of the forest, Duke Frederick met and spoke with an old religious man, after which Duke Frederick was converted and gave up his attempt to storm the forest and his crown, bequeathing it back to Duke Senior. Duke Frederick also gave back the lands he took from the men who were exiled with Duke Senior. Jaques de Bois swears on his life.
Duke Senior welcomes Jaques de Bois and says that he has brought a fine gift to his brother's weddings. Oliver will get the confiscated de Bois land back, and Orlando will inherit Duke Senior's dukedom when Orlando and Rosalind marry. First, however, Duke Senior says, they need to finish the marriage ceremonies, and afterwards, everyone who followed him into the forest will share in this good fortune according to their own estates. In the meantime, Duke Senior says, let's forget that everyone has their courtly status back and keep partying like country folk. Duke Senior commands musicians to play and the brides and bridegrooms to dance.
Jaques, the fool, asks Duke Senior for permission to speak before the music starts, which the Duke grants. Then Jaques asks Jaques de Bois that if he understands correctly, Duke Frederick has left court to pursue the life of a monk or religious hermit. Jaques de Bois confirms this to be true. Jaques says he will go to Duke Frederick as there is much to learn from the recently converted. Jaques gives his best wishes to each of the men and prepares to leave. Duke Senior asks him to stay, but Jaques says he will not stay to see merriment, but he will wait at Duke Senior's cave to hear what Duke Senior has to say to him. Jaques exits. Duke Senior tells the rest of the group to proceed with the marriage ceremony and festivities, trusting that they will end in delight. There is music and dance. All exit, except Rosalind.
Rosalind speaks the epilogue of the play to the audience and begins by acknowledging that it is not common for a female character to deliver an epilogue. Furthermore, good plays don't need epilogues, but they can become better plays by the help of an epilogue. Rosalind says that she is in a pickle because she is neither delivering a good epilogue, nor can she trick the audience into thinking this was a good play. She also cannot beg for their good opinion. However, she can conjure them, and begins by addressing the women in the audience. She instructs the women that, for the love they bear men, to like as much of the play as they'd like. She then instructs the men that for the love they bear to women, which she can tell by their simpering smiles that none of the men in the audience hates women, that between them and the women the play may be found likable. Rosalind then says that if she were a woman, she would kiss all of the men in the audience whose beards and looks she liked and who didn't have bad breath. And in exchange, she asks those men with good beards, good faces, and good breath to bid her farewell when she curtsies. Rosalind exits.
And that's as you like it.
Thanks to Nat Yonce for editing this episode, and thank you for listening.
I'm Kourtney Smith.
And I'm Elyse Sharp.
This is Shakespeare Anyone?
Thank you so much for listening to Shakespeare Anyone. Works referenced in this episode are available in the episode description. Our theme music is Neverending Minute by Sounds Like Sander.
If you would like to support us, visit shakespeareanyone.com/support or check out the links in our episode description. You can also hit the subscribe button, like us, leave a comment, write a review, share us on social media, tell a friend about us, all the things. We'd appreciate it. For more, you can visit our website, shakespeareanyone.com, or follow us on Instagram at ShakespeareAnyonePod.
Now, because you listened all the way to the end of the credits, here is a completely random Shakespeare quote for you.
From Twelfth Night, Act 5, Scene 1, said by Orsino. Notable pirate, thou salt-water thief, what foolish boldness brought thee to their mercies, whom thou in terms so bloody and so dear hast made thine enemies?